Across this season, we've explored a series of changes in education: artificial intelligence generating explanations, feedback systems responding instantly, credentials becoming more modular, assignments evolving in response to new tools, learning environments becoming more connected. Now, at first glance, these might seem like separate trends, but taken together, they point to something deeper: a shift in where learning happens, and more importantly, who shapes it. Welcome back to the EdTech Curio cabinet. Hello again, I'm Christina, and in this season, we've explored how technology is reshaping learning. As always, we've looked at these changes through four lenses: the artifact, the tools and systems emerging; the pattern, what history tells us about similar shifts; the paradox, the tensions those shifts create; and the signal, what they might mean for the future. And across each of these curios, a common thread has emerged. Learning is becoming more distributed, less confined to classrooms, less dependent on a single source of authority, and more shaped by networks of tools, systems, and interactions. Which brings us to the final question for this season. If learning is no longer contained in one space, who owns it? Today, learning rarely happens within a single system. A student might watch a lecture through one platform and then complete an adaptive practice in another, perhaps receive feedback in an automated system, and then ask questions of an AI assistant. They might then collaborate with peers in a shared digital space and then apply knowledge through real world or simulated environments. And increasingly, these systems are not just delivering content, they are participating in the learning process. They generate explanations, they evaluate responses, they suggest next steps. In other words, they influence how understanding develops. This is a shift from tools that support learning to systems that actively shape it. And as we saw earlier this season, this raises important questions about authorship, agency, and interpretation. When systems of knowledge expand, one thing consistently becomes more important: trust. We've seen this pattern before. When printing expanded access to information, institutions emerged to validate knowledge. When the internet made information abundant, new systems developed to evaluate credibility. And in education, something similar is happening now. As learning becomes distributed across tools and environments, the question is no longer just what can students access, but what can we trust? This connects directly to something we explored earlier this season in the episode on homework and generative AI. When answers can be produced easily, the meaning of those answers becomes less clear. And this is where academic integrity enters the conversation, not simply as a question of rule following, but as a question of authentic learning. The International Center for Academic Integrity emphasizes that integrity is fundamentally about ensuring that academic work reflects genuine understanding. But when learning is distributed across systems, some human and some artificial, that boundary becomes harder to define. So the pattern is clear. As systems expand, the need for trust does not diminish, it intensifies. Now here's the paradox. Students today have more support than ever before. They can access explanations instantly. They receive feedback continuously, and they use tools that help them complete complex tasks. But at the same time, it can become harder to determine what they actually understand. If an AI system helps generate an answer, where does a student's thinking begin and end? If a platform guides each step, how much of the reasoning is independent? If multiple systems contribute to that process, who is the learner? The paradox is this: the more support we provide, the less certain we become about what learning has actually occurred. And this is not just a technical problem, it's a philosophical one. It challenges how we define knowledge, authorship, and understanding. The signal emerging from this season is not that learning belongs to any single entity, not the student, not the instructor, not the institution, and certainly not the technology. Instead, learning becomes something that is orchestrated across systems, environments, experiences, and interactions. In this model, the role of education shifts. It shifts from delivering knowledge to shaping coherent learning journeys. Institutions may increasingly focus on validating learning across different contexts, or ensuring integrity in distributed environments, or simply helping learners connect experiences into meaningful understanding. And instructors, as we explored earlier, help students make sense of what they encounter, not by controlling every input, but by guiding the interpretation. Across this season, one idea has taken shape. Learning is no longer confined. It moves across tools, across environments, across moments. But as it moves, it becomes harder to see clearly, harder to interpret, and harder to trust. And that may be the real challenge of modern education. Not access, not capability, but coherence. Learning is becoming more open, more flexible, and more distributed. But understanding still requires structure, it still requires meaning, and it still requires trust. And as education continues to evolve, these elements may become more important than ever. That's why we keep the cabinet open. Thanks for exploring the EdTech Curio cabinet. Before we close the cabinet on season 2, it's worth stepping back. This season began with tools, artificial intelligence, digital platforms, new forms of credentials, and new ways of learning. But along the way, something else became clear. These were not just changes in technology, they were changes in structure. Learning became more distributed, more modular, more connected, and in many ways, more complex. We saw that access expanded, feedback is accelerated, pathways diversified, and authority shifted. But as these changes unfolded, a deeper question emerged. If learning no longer lives in one place, under one system, guided by one authority, then what holds it together? Because learning does not happen in isolation. It happens within systems, institutional systems, cultural systems, national systems. And those systems shape what learning looks like in ways that are often invisible. Which brings us to the next set of curios. Because in season 3, we step back again, beyond tools, beyond individual learning experiences, and into the systems that shape education itself. We'll explore why some countries emphasize rigor, while others emphasize exploration, how examination systems shape behavior, and how institutions balance specialization and breadth. And finally, how these patterns repeat across different regions and time periods. Because if season 2 asked, how is learning changing? Season 3 asks, why does learning take the form it does? But for now, we'll close the cabinet on season 2. Thanks for exploring the EdTech Curio cabinet. And as always, keep asking curious questions.